Hey guys, welcome to the last chapter of your class. This chapter is all about the age of Reagan, a time in which yours truly grew up. Reagan was the hero of the conservative movement, and we're going to talk about the events that led to his rise and led to people throwing all kinds of support behind Ronald Reagan. Let's take a look at the objectives real quick for this chapter. As always, if things move too fast in the slides, feel free to finish the audio portion of this, but then go back and look at the regular Prezi if you miss anything as we go through here. So we've talked about the post-war boom and how everyone thought that their country's abilities, their government's abilities was limitless, to the hippie movement, the youth culture questioning the validity of the government involvement and the actions of the government, to the crisis of authority, where it appears that a lot of the decisions being made by the federal government were the wrong decision, just one bad decision after another. And that leads to a new conservative movement, an overall distrust in government. Kind of capitulates or comes to a climax with Nixon and the Watergate scandal. And that takes us to where we are right now on this slide. 1974, Gerald Ford takes over as Nixon resigns, and Ford carries out the remainder of Nixon's presidency. Ford attempts to basically do damage control, restore confidence in the office of the president. Unfortunately for him, there are so many things that are going on, not because of Ford and his policies, but because of everything that has been leading up to this point. Ford inherits all this junk with the oil embargoes and the Cold War and Middle East troubles. It's just more than what one president can handle in a shortened, abbreviated presidential term. He's criticized by both Republicans and Democrats for not doing enough, and essentially, carries out that last term. He does get the nomination for president in 1976. He is challenged by Ronald Reagan. Reagan falls just shy of getting the nomination, but Ford gets the nomination of the Republican Party. Reagan runs in 76 as an independent, doesn't get a lot of votes as far as the Electoral College is concerned. The Democrats throw up Jimmy Carter. Carter runs his campaign as an outsider. He claims to be an outsider. He's not one of those D.C. elites who are going to be there for a lifetime. He doesn't follow the political rhetoric of D.C., he claims. He's actually one of the first people to be elected president since Zachary Taylor from the Deep South, that is. He comes in as the man to make the change. He comes in with a lot of support from the Democrats and some Republicans because he is an outsider. He's not one of those. He's one of us. He leaves office 4 short years later as one of the least popular men to ever hold the office. That is until our current president in 2012 or 2014. 58% of disapproval rating. That's pretty bad. And again, it's not necessarily because of what Carter did. It's more of what Carter did not do and what he inherited from the presidents of Johnson and Nixon before him. His biggest accomplishment is the Camp David Accords, where he has Egypt and Israel being able to sit down at a table to work out some peace agreements. Other than that, that's really about all he was able to do. Carter was not willing to compromise. He stood very firm in his ways, and unfortunately, because of his outsider label that he gave himself, he also appoints a lot of non-political people to his cabinet, outsiders, if you will, and they just don't play well with others. They don't play well with the established politicians in D.C., and so essentially nothing gets done. 1999, we do see the return of the Panama Canal to that country, part of the agreement that we had when we first took it over in 1904. That comes to a culminating event with President Clinton, but the process starts during the Carter presidency. And one final event that really just nails the coffin on Carter's attempt to win the presidency in 1980 is the Iran hostage affair in 1979. Just a quick note on his emergence, basically from being a relatively unknown governor to the President of the United States. Again, he focuses his campaign by offering the nation a sense of honesty and piety, something that they have clearly seen the opposite of. They've been lied to by Johnson. The Great Society programs did not work the way he promised they would. They've been lied to by Nixon. He was involved in Watergate. After all, he resigned, and information came out to show that their president had lied to them. So Carter's plan to run on a system or a policy of honesty is a welcome breath of fresh air, if you will. But again, despite all of the people's willingness to support him on the election day, he and Ford were basically neck and neck as far as who would win that 1976 election. Carter does win, though. Public events in World War II leave people shaken and uncertain. They're willing to try just about anybody. Again, Johnson's Great Society program fails miserably, leaving the liberals kind of scratching their head, questioning, like, well, what else can we try? This all causes a movement in what's known as the conservative right, a conservative movement to take back the government from the liberals. Quick word on the Iran hostage affair. I've mentioned it in previous lessons, but in 1979, the United States, over a long period of time, had been supporting the Shah of Iran, the leader of Iran. And he was hoping to take Iran, I guess, to the next level, if you like that cliche. The Shah of Iran wanted to make Iran more of a Western culture. Unfortunately for the Shah of Iran, the people of Iran were very fundamental in their beliefs, and they did not like anything about the Eastern world. I think I said Western just a second ago. I meant Eastern world. They liked nothing about the Eastern world. And so they revolted, and they essentially force the Shah to abdicate. And he's having some health issues anyhow, so he steps down. That creates a vacuum of power. The United States attempts to negotiate with all these different religious factions who are attempting now to gain power in Iran, and they're not very successful at that, and so they just give up. The Ayatollah Khomeini, a religious leader of Iran, does eventually gain power, and he is very open, very blatant about his hatred toward the United States. And this begins the 1979 oil embargo. The Iranian religious people, under the guidance of the Ayatollah Khomeini, storm the U.S. Embassy in Tehran, and they take 53 or 52 Americans hostage. And it seems to be no negotiating at all. There's nothing that we can do to get our hostages returned. So they are hostages for over a year. The Carter administration does freeze some Iranian assets, and that eventually does help out because Iran and Iraq are verging on war. And with the frozen assets, Iran is kind of put in a little pickle, if you will. And so right about the time Reagan gets elected, I think it's actually 1 year to the day of the taking of the hostages, the 1980 elections are held in the United States. And with the election of Reagan, the hostages are set free. Now, the way the media spun it, and I remember this because I remember watching the election in 1980, because it was a major issue. Who's going to be president? What's going to happen with the hostages? Well, all throughout Reagan's campaign, he made it very clear that if he wins the presidency, he's going in with military force to get the Americans back. So the way the media spun this event, Reagan is elected, and almost immediately those hostages are set free, and the media made it look like the Iranians were afraid of Reagan. And that was just to go with Reagan's popularity of this conservative man from California who said that government needs to get out of the lives of the people, and government needs to reduce its size, and government needs to cut its spending. Everything the people wanted to hear, Reagan was doing, and Reagan, enjoyed a lot of great success because of that. This conservative movement, we can see geographically its creation or its origin in what's known as the Sun Belt, and this is a geographical location stretching across the southern part of the United States, from southeastern Florida through Texas and southwestern California. Now, California is not necessarily conservative, But the southern parts of some major affluent suburbs of California are. The population of this region greatly exceeds the industrial areas of the north. If you can think back to the Industrial Revolution, specifically the election of 1896 with McKinley. McKinley won by campaigning very, very little. He campaigned from the back of his porch. He didn't have to, because he had the money and the backing of the industrial Northeast and the industrial Midwest. And they also had the population. They had the electoral numbers. William Jennings Bryan carries almost every state in the South and the West. But he doesn't have the numbers because the population was so small. So now we jump ahead to 1980, and the geographic location of the Sun Belt, that population greatly exceeds, the industrial areas. And so when those people start to vote conservative, that's why we start to see conservative people being placed in government positions. These populist traditions, the idea that the farmer, the populists, are still around is, they just pop their head out of nowhere. And essentially, it's not a populist tradition like farmers' way of life, but more of what's popular with the people at the time, and that was the conservative movement. This demand for a smaller government and get rid of such heavy restrictions on the people. Again, Great Society fails. They see that as nothing more than Reconstruction era politics. That's the government telling us what to do and how to do it. Quick note on this conservative movement: we see a changing, not a changing of the guard, but a changing of political philosophy, a changing of political ideology. In the 1800s, it was the Democrat who was the fan of the little guy. He was the protector of the little man, and it was the Republican who was in the pockets of the industrialists and the capitalists. And so in the 1960s and 70s, we see a shift. And the Republican conservatives become a fan and a protector and a guard of the little man, of the conservative and moral values. And the Democrats are now relying on big money and big industry and the welfare recipients to get elected. Again, Southern California, California itself, not necessarily conservative, but the suburbs of California. And to be quite honest, these are the stay-at-home moms who have a lot of time on their hands to really get involved, to make a big push to reclaim the family, return back to a society of values and morals. And we start to see increase in church movement and religious revivals all over the country, denouncing abortion and divorce, and feminism is evil as well. Wives should be submissive to their husbands. Homosexuality is a sin, and we need to get back to teaching creation. Look at how our country has changed because of what we're teaching in our schools. We need to get back to this time of morals and values. So the right-wing movement, the conservative movement, is one of the big reasons why Ronald Reagan is able to win several elections, 2 terms as governor of California, and he takes that momentum from his governorship and he applies it to the 1980 election, in which he runs up against Carter. And you can see there it's a massive landslide, 489 electoral votes to 49. And again, this is because he has the rural areas, the South and the West, the Sun Belt area, while Carter has the industrial areas, what has now become the welfare states, essentially. Reagan's success can be contributed, as we just spent many, many minutes talking about, the changing population of the Sun Belt, this return to conservative values. Jerry Falwell, evangelical speaker, he is the person responsible for coining the phrase the moral majority. It's that people, the majority of the United States citizens who, if they believe in God and follow the morals, the teachings of the Bible, they can make a change and save this country from damnation. James Dobson and Focus on the Family, return to family values. Pat Robertson, the 700 Club, helping out and strengthening the families. And then we have the 2 really radical speakers, Billy Graham and Jimmy Swaggart, hellfire and brimstone. If you don't change your life, you're going to suffer eternal damnation. Reagan also contributes his win to the neoconservatives. We'll get to those in just a second. Oh, how about now? Neoconservatives, highly influential, small group, wealthy Americans, used to be Democrats. They broke away from the liberal Democratic Party because they just did not agree with the way it was moving, claimed to be too close to communism, taking too much power in the hands of the government, dictating everyday life too much. These neoconservatives, they have money, they're associated with the corporate world, the financial world, they're very committed to capitalism, the right of the business owner to run their business as they see fit, and they start to move back to the old ways of, government needs to step out of our lives, government needs to let loose of a little bit of regulation, and they work very closely with Reagan in rebuilding the failing economy. Reagan, again, as part of his success in government, Reagan has great political skills, and there are three groups that he has to work with. Three seemingly, three groups that don't seem to have anything in common. Reagan takes those three groups and creates a fantastic period of 8 years in the United States where everyone in the country, everyone in the world rather, knew you don't mess with the United States. The first group would be the populist conservatives, obviously from the Sun Belt. They have full 100% approval and support of Reagan and will give him anything he wants. So that was Reagan's least concern there. He knew he had their support. The neoconservatives, these are the new liberals. They're coming in because their old system has failed them. So they're a little iffy. What can you do for us? We want to help, but boy, we're really scared because we've already been burnt once. But they know they want to take the country back from the radicals, and so they're willing to listen to Reagan's policies. And then the corporate conservatives, the wealthy, the people who protect their money, they earn their money, but they protect their money. They're very smart. They're willing to help out, but they also want a little bit in exchange. And so Reagan, again, takes these three groups and gets them to work together for 8 years of success. And one of the biggest successes of Reagan's policies is what's known as Reaganomics, or supply-side economics. Reagan believes that the economy is failing because of excessive government taxation. Now, Lyndon Johnson increased a lot of taxes on the American people to support his Great Society program. In order to feed these entitlement programs of the Great Society, we have to increase government revenue, and the best way to do that, according to Johnson, was to increase taxes. This leaves no money for private investors. If you're spending all your money or giving away all your money in government taxes, you have no disposable income to invest, and as a result, the economy slows down. So Reagan says, let's cut taxes, let's give tax breaks to the big businesses and to the wealthy. This is going to create a general economic revival for everyone. We call that trickle-down economics. And there's a lot of people opposed to this because they don't want things to trickle down to them. They want things to be equal for them, so to speak. So here's how this works, and you can see I've got my little cycle here because this is essentially a cycle. Wealthy and large business gets tax break, and that's exactly what happened. Those large businesses take that extra money and invest it. They invest it in hiring additional employees. More employees means lower unemployment, which means more people have paychecks. Those people with paychecks go spend their money in the market. They buy needed items, everyday items, and some big ticket items. Those consumers increase demand. The increased demand requires an increased supply. Increased supply means those businesses have to hire more. They have to increase production and hire more. And so with increased production and increased employment, we see even more decrease in unemployment, and the economic cycle booms. And in the entire 1980s, we had a booming economy. We did have an increase in national debt. We'll get to that in just a moment. Reagan knew that if you cut taxes, that means you're cutting government revenue, and Reagan understood, unlike some of our politicians today, that when you cut government revenue, you have to cut spending. You approach it from your own personal checkbook point of view. If you get a reduction in your salary, You cannot go out and spend money the same way. You have to cut back your spending. Reagan knew this. Reagan did this. He had a great support in cutting the national budget, $40 billion in budget reduction over a 3-year period. Every one of his plans passed through Congress. Unfortunately, his spending was not as low as he needed it to be, and so we were still spending more than we were making. But through his economic plan, we do see unemployment dropping by 4% in the United States. The GNP increases, inflation falls, consumer spending, consumer confidence in the economy grows, stock markets rise. There is a recession in '82, but that recession, although it kind of scared some people at first and thought, hey, maybe Reagan's plan isn't working after all, the recession is over very quickly because of Reagan's plan. The economy rebounds very, very quickly. Again, the national debt does grow, but a lot of this is not because of Reagan's policies. A lot of this is due because of the entitlement programs that were passed during the Johnson era. There's a lot of government spending being just handed out to a dependent class, people who are waiting for the government to take care of them. Social Security was a major entitlement program. When it was first created, during the New Deal, it was designed to take care of people in their retirement. And, you have a little bit of money pulled out each paycheck. And so when you retire, you have that to live on. It was not meant to be an entitlement program when it was first created. The Great Society and the Johnson era created that entitlement program. And so we see a heavy draw on government funds to these entitlement programs. That's causing a national deficit. Again, Reagan did not see a decrease in spending as much as he was hoping for. Actually, some spending does increase, especially in the area of defense. We'll get into Reagan's foreign policy and his defense plan in just a moment. Reagan does attempt to cut a lot of entitlement programs, which he does see a little resistance to this because a lot of the entitlement programs hits the students and hits the young people of the country. His foreign policy was to take an active stand against communism. There was a great fear in the 80s that there would be a World War III. You could just picture Reagan in his office and Gorbachev in his office in Moscow with their fingers on the red button, just waiting to push. Who's going to push the button first? Reagan took a very active stance against communism. Reagan implements or has Congress implement the SDI, the Strategic Defense Initiative, known as the Star Wars program, because of the Star Wars movie at the time were becoming very popular with the culture. Reagan says you don't need to build new nuclear weapons. You need to build a system of missiles that can stop any nuclear weapon should they be launched against the United States. Russia claims that this is nothing more than a reason to build up your weaponry and vows that they will not sit down and talk about any kind of nuclear freeze if this weapons initiative is put into place. And so Reagan kind of puts that on hold. And Russia and the United States do sit down. They do agree on a nuclear freeze where there's no new weapons, nuclear weapons being created. Other parts of Reagan's foreign policy, again, focusing on communism to stop the spread of communism anywhere in the world. Most of that dealt during Reagan's presidency. Most of that was in Central America, in Grenada, El Salvador, and Nicaragua. There is Grenada. You can see it's in the Caribbean Sea, just south of Puerto Rico. El Salvador on the southern tip of the Horn of South America, and then Nicaragua in Central America, close to the northern tip of South America. Nicaragua's here, Grenada over here. I don't think my map shows El Salvador. With the success of Reagan's first 4 years, Reagan easily wins the Republican nomination. He runs against Walter Mondale of the Democrats, and the Democrats nominate the very first woman ever to appear on the national ticket, Geraldine Ferraro. They don't do very well. In fact, they do worse than Carter. did in the 1980 election. Despite Reagan's success, the Republicans do lose some seats in Congress, and as a result, Reagan's second 4 years are not as successful economically in his policies as his first 4 years. I guess that's typical of just about every president. We're seeing that now with our current President Obama. His first 4 years, he had a Democratic majority in both House and Senate. He's able to get through a lot of his policies. And now that those policies seem to be failing, in his second term, he does lose some of his control of Congress because the Republicans have regained some seats. I guess that's a typical move in the political arena. Cold War has been going on essentially since the end of World War II, and it's a bipolar community, the United States and Russia being the two poles of power. Gorbachev is a man who wants to see an improvement in his country, and he's willing to take the chance on capitalism. He sees that communism has failed his country, and so he takes the stance and he takes a chance on ending communism, and essentially the dismantling of the communist regime takes place in I think late 80s. Two revolutionary measures passed by Gorbachev: glasnost, an openness, a removal of the repressive features of Soviet life. One good example of this would be freedom of the press. No longer is it a government-controlled press. The newspapers can print their stories as they see fit. And perestroika just simply means reform, a way to restructure the rigid and unproductive economy. He introduces, in a way to restructure the economy in Russia, is to introduce a lot of elements of capitalism, such as private ownership and profit motives. 1987, we see a reduction in Soviet influence in Eastern Europe. Almost every communist state changes its government. A lot of the communist states gain their independence and become their own sovereign countries. China, however, resists the appeal to restructure its communists. Actually, China remains communist. I think they're a democratic communist democracy today. I can't even describe it, but from this point, we now enter a period of multipolarity, where there's more than one power, more than one nation that has the power to disrupt peace on earth. A big showdown in China amongst its own people who are calling for the end of communism takes place in Tiananmen Square, where finally the Chinese government sends in the military to crush this uprising of civilians. June 3rd, 1989, the bloody massacres in Tiananmen Square. People being shot down by their own government. Very famous photo of a young person standing in front of the tanks. And I'm not sure. I honestly don't know what happens next in the next frame here. I don't know. I can't recall if this person stands firm and gets run over, or if he's escorted out, or if the tanks stop. I don't remember the situation behind that, but just a lot of uprising, and finally China gets control of the situation and represses its people pretty severely. Guys, thanks for listening. Take care.